The unseen threat, 5 to 7 minute hook. The galaxy was at peace. Planets lived in harmony, connected by trade, diplomacy, and mutual understanding. Among them was the peaceful world of Veldora, a planet known for its beauty and its people, gentle, wise, and kind-hearted. The Veldorans, with their deep love for their world, had always been content with their simple way of life. They had no need for warriors or weapons. They believed that peace was the greatest gift one could give. But one fateful night, that peace was shattered. A distress signal cut through the vast emptiness of space. It was weak, trembling with fear, a cry for help that echoed across the stars. The message was clear. Veldora was under attack. The Veldorans were helpless, their cities burning, their lives shattered in an instant. They had no way of defending themselves. The attackers were ruthless, powerful beyond imagination. The Veldorans sent out their plea, hoping someone would hear it, hoping someone would come to their aid. For days they waited. The invaders didn't stop. Their ships filled the skies, blocking out the stars. Each attack brought the Veldorans closer to the edge of extinction. The enemy was relentless, moving like a shadow through the peaceful world, leaving nothing but devastation behind. The Veldorans had never known such terror. Their once beautiful cities were reduced to rubble. The green forests that had once thrived now lay scorched and silent. Their people were scattered, hiding in the dark corners of their world, clinging to hope, praying for salvation. Then, just as their hope began to fade, a new message appeared on their communications network. This message was different. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a promise. A fleet was coming. A fleet that would end the invaders' reign of terror. At first, the Veldorans didn't know who had sent the message. They weren't sure if it was a trick or if it was too late. But as the seconds passed, their eyes turned to the sky. There in the distance, they saw something they had never expected: ships. Not just any ships, but massive warships, moving with terrifying speed. Their hulls gleamed under the light of distant stars, and their size was overwhelming. They didn't look like the ships of any friendly race the Veldorans knew. These ships were different. Their markings were unfamiliar, their design unlike anything the Veldorans had seen before. The ships arrived at Veldora's orbit, and the moment they did, the enemy forces paused. The invaders, who had been tearing through the planet with ease, suddenly halted in their tracks. They seemed to recognize the presence of the fleet, and that recognition struck fear into them. The Veldorans watched in awe. They had never seen anything like this before. The ships above them moved with the precision of a well-trained army, their weapons primed and ready. The very air around Veldora seemed to thrum with energy. These were no ordinary rescuers. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The fleet belonged to the Deathworlders. The name sent chills down the Veldorans' spines. The Deathworlders were a race of warriors known throughout the galaxy for their unmatched strength, their brutal efficiency in combat, and their terrifying reputation. They were feared by many, and their name alone was enough to make even the most powerful enemies hesitate. The Veldorans had no idea who the Deathworlders were or why they had come, but one thing was clear: they were the last hope. There would be no mercy for the invaders. The Deathworlders didn't come to negotiate. They didn't come to talk. They came to fight, to win, and to destroy. As the Deathworlder fleet began to descend toward Veldora's surface, the Veldorans felt a mix of relief and dread. Their saviors had arrived, but at what cost? The Deathworlders were fierce warriors, but they were also known to be merciless. Would the Veldorans survive the battle, or would they be caught in the wake of the Deathworlders' fury? The first shot was fired. The invaders had no time to react as the Deathworlder fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower. The skies erupted in flashes of bright light as explosions rocked the enemy ships. The Deathworlders were fast and efficient, their weapons devastating. The enemy, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves. But it was already too late. The Veldorans watched as their planet's saviors fought. It was a sight they had never seen before: fighters leaping from the ground to the sky, massive warships trading fire, and explosions lighting up the heavens. The Deathworlders weren't here to negotiate peace. They were here to win, and nothing would stand in their way. In that moment, the Veldorans realized the truth. Their planet had been saved, but at a price. The Deathworlders would not leave until the last of their enemies had been defeated. Veldora would never be the same again, and neither would the universe. The fury of the Deathworlders. The planet Veldora had never known true war. Sure, there were skirmishes with neighboring worlds in the past, but those were always settled peacefully. No, the Veldorans had lived their lives in harmony, their world untouched by the chaos that sometimes raged across the galaxy. That was, until now. The Deathworlders, a force of nature in their own right, descended with a terrifying ferocity that Veldora had never seen. The invaders, though powerful, had underestimated the ferocity of the warriors who now stood against them. The Deathworlders had no time for mercy. Their mission was clear: eliminate the threat, save the innocent, and leave no room for hesitation. From the moment the battle began, it became evident that the Deathworlders weren't like any other force the galaxy had ever known. Their ships tore through the skies like unstoppable meteors, weaving in and out of enemy fire with unnatural precision. Their warriors, clad in battle armor that seemed to hum with energy, moved with a deadly grace. Each movement was calculated, each strike purposeful. It wasn't just a fight. It was an execution, and the invaders were the prey. The ground trembled as explosions shook the city of Veldora. The Deathworlders didn't spare the buildings. Their warships unleashed torrents of energy at the enemy, reducing entire enemy fleets to rubble in seconds. The sound of battle was deafening. Shouts, explosions, and the roar of weapons filled the air. Yet through it all, the Deathworlders fought with a cold, detached fury. They showed no emotion, no mercy. They had come to save, but they had also come to destroy. The invaders were in chaos. They had expected an easy conquest, a planet ripe for the taking. They never imagined that such a force would rise up to challenge them. Their ships scattered across the sky, trying to regroup and find a way to strike back. But the Deathworlders were relentless. Their tactics were flawless, their strikes precise. It was clear that this wasn't their first battle. They had fought countless wars, and their experience was evident in every move they made. The Veldorans, watching from the safety of their shelters, couldn't believe their eyes. These warriors weren't just fighting for a cause. They were fighting for vengeance. It was as though the Deathworlders had taken it upon themselves to exact punishment upon those who dared to harm the innocent. The very thought sent chills down the Veldorans' spines. As the battle raged on, one of the Veldorans' leaders, a wise elder named Halloran, observed the destruction from his hidden chamber. He had seen enough in his lifetime to recognize that the Deathworlders were unlike any other beings they had encountered. They weren't here for negotiation, for diplomacy, or even for a simple rescue. They were here for retribution. "I never thought we would need such saviors," Talleyrand murmured to himself, his eyes fixed on the destruction outside. The invaders, though powerful, were no match for the Deathworlders, but the cost of the battle was rising. The planet's surface was scared, and the skies above were choked with smoke and fire. The very landscape that the Veldorans had known and loved was changing forever. Suddenly, the sound of the comm system crackled to life. A voice, one that Talleyrand did not recognize, came through. "We are nearing the final stages of the battle. The enemy will soon be broken. However, you must understand this. The Deathworlders do not leave a planet unchanged. When we are done, Veldora will no longer be the world it once was." Talleyrand's heart skipped a beat. He understood the warning all too well. The Deathworlders had come to save them, but they would leave their mark on the planet. There would be no going back. Veldora would be changed forever. As the voice faded out, Talleyrand found himself lost in thought. The death and destruction outside his door were a testament to the power of these beings. But what of the future? Would the Deathworlders remain on Veldora, imposing their strength upon the world until they were no longer needed? Or would they leave, leaving the Veldorans to rebuild a world shattered by their saviors? The invaders, meanwhile, were losing ground. Their once mighty ships were now reduced to debris, and the warriors who had once marched on Veldora with confidence now ran in fear. The Deathworlders had decimated them. Yet, as Talaran watched, he realized that the battle was far from over. The Deathworlders' fury wasn't just about saving Veldora. It was about sending a message to anyone who dared threaten the innocent. And that message was clear. No one, no matter how powerful, was safe from the wrath of the Deathworlders. The sky, once filled with enemy fire, was now dominated by the shadows of the victorious fleet. The Deathworlders had made their mark. The invaders were gone, and Veldora was safe, for now. But as the dust settled, one question lingered in the minds of the Veldorans. What price had they paid for this victory? The aftermath of fury. The dust had settled over the scorched landscape of Veldora, and silence had descended upon the planet, at least for a moment. The once pristine cities, now reduced to rubble, lay in eerie stillness. The ruins were a reminder of the destruction that had come with the Deathworlders' intervention. Though the invaders had been eradicated, their mark was forever etched into the planet's surface. Talaran, the wise Veldoran elder, stood at the edge of the crater that had once been the center of his city. He gazed into the distance, where the smoke still rose in thick plumes, choking the sky. The wind, once gentle and calming, now carried the smell of burning metal and charred earth. It was a reminder of the price the Veldorans had paid for their salvation. The Deathworlders had left an indelible mark on Veldora, but they hadn't disappeared completely. Their ships, sleek and dark, still loomed in the sky. They hadn't just defeated the invaders, they had reshaped the planet itself. The city streets that had once been bustling with life now stood desolate, echoing the power of the forces that had unleashed such chaos. Talaran's heart weighed heavy as he thought of the future. What would become of Veldora now? Would the Deathworlders leave, or would they impose their dominance, shaping their world in their image? The Veldorans had been saved, but at what cost? As if on cue, the comms crackled again. This time, it was a voice the Elder recognized. Commander Varric of the Deathworlder fleet. The deep, commanding voice was familiar, though always distant. Elder Talaran. The voice boomed. We have secured the planet. The invaders are no more, but the threat may still linger in the far reaches of the galaxy. We cannot stay here forever. Talaran clenched his fists. It was true. The Deathworlders were warriors, driven by a sense of justice that often led them to places others feared to tread. But their missions were never permanent. The moment they had set out to destroy the invaders, they had already begun thinking of the next battle. What will become of us? Talaran asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. He knew that the Deathworlders had saved them, but they had also brought chaos, and it was not clear if their presence was a blessing or a curse. We will leave once our task is complete, Varric answered, his tone somber. The invaders will not return, but your world has been irrevocably changed. You must rebuild, but you are not alone. We will watch from afar. Should the need arise again, you will know where to find us. Talaran stood in silence for a moment. He had always known that peace was fragile, but the Deathworlders' words made it clear that Veldora would never be the same again. The invaders had been vanquished, but the scars left on the planet and its people would take much longer to heal. The Deathworlders, though gone from the surface of the planet, had set in motion a chain of events that would echo through the centuries. The Veldorans had witnessed power beyond comprehension, and in the face of such overwhelming force, they realized that their fragile peace was not guaranteed. As the comms ended, Talaran took one last look at the destroyed city. He could hear the faint sounds of his people stirring from the ruins. They were beginning to rebuild, though there was a sense of unease in the air. The Deathworlders had saved them, but they had also shown them the cost of power. The world they had once known was gone, replaced by something new, something more dangerous. In the distance, the Deathworlder ships slowly began to retract from the planet's atmosphere, their ominous shadows fading as they disappeared into space. Talaran watched them go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the peace they had known would never return. But there was hope, too, for the future. The Deathworlders had not destroyed Veldora entirely. They had simply made it clear that survival came with sacrifice. It was a lesson that Talaran hoped would not be forgotten. As the final ship vanished from the sky, the Elder turned back to his people. They would rebuild, yes, but they would do so with the knowledge that, should the universe call upon them again, they now had the power to fight back. The Deathworlders had left their mark on Veldora, and it was a mark that would never fade. The galaxy had seen their fury, but the question now was, what would the Veldorans do with the strength that had been given to them? The seeds of change. Veldora was never meant to be a battleground, a planet known for its peaceful atmosphere, lush forests, and wide-open plains. It had always been a place where nature and civilization coexisted harmoniously. However, as the dust settled and the ruins of their cities were surveyed, the Veldorans could not ignore the profound truth: the planet was no longer the same. Talaran, the Veldoran Elder, stood in the center of what was once a bustling marketplace. The sounds of children laughing, the sweet aroma of flowers from the nearby garden. Those familiar things were now gone. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, as charred buildings lined the streets like tombstones for a forgotten way of life. The world around him was silent, and the echoes of what had been before the battle seemed haunting. His mind wandered back to the moment when the Deathworlder fleet had first arrived. The power they wielded was unimaginable. Entire fleets of ships, their hulls designed for war, hovering ominously over Veldora's peaceful lands. At first, the Veldorans had feared them. How could they not? The fleet was a symbol of absolute force. Yet, as the battle raged on, and the invaders were driven back, a sense of awe began to replace the fear. The Deathworlders hadn't just been warriors. They were harbingers of change. Their methods, their technology, and their sheer presence had altered everything. The invaders, once a force capable of annihilating planets, were gone, but the Veldorans knew that their future would never be the same. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about adaptation. Talaran turned toward the group of Veldoran leaders who had gathered near the city center. Their faces, once filled with hope and optimism, now looked worn and tired. They had witnessed the battle up close and seen the devastation firsthand. As the leader of the Veldorans, Talaran knew that they would need to make decisions that could shape the future of their world. What would they do with the knowledge of the Deathworlders' power? How could they ensure that their world didn't fall prey to future threats? Talaran, one of the leaders, Sarah, called, her voice shaking slightly. What now? How do we rebuild from this? The Elder's eyes softened, and he stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. We rebuild, yes, but we must also change. We cannot pretend that what happened here will just fade with time. We need to learn, adapt, and strengthen ourselves. The universe is vast, and if there is one thing the Deathworlders have shown us, it's that there is always a greater force out there. The Veldorans exchanged uncertain glances. They were a peaceful people by nature, and the thought of embracing violence, or even power, felt foreign to them. However, the reality of their situation was undeniable. They had seen the power of the Deathworlders, and they had been saved because of it. The invaders were gone, but the galaxy wasn't. And who was to say that another threat wouldn't emerge? We must prepare ourselves, Talaran continued, not just for peace, but for defense. We must be able to protect ourselves when the time comes, and we must work with those who have shown us that strength. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. But will they help us again? Should we need them? Talaran sighed. It was a question that had weighed on him since the battle's end. The Deathworlders had done their part. They had obliterated the invaders, and now they were gone. But there was a deep uncertainty in the Elder's heart. Would the Deathworlders return when Veldora called out for help again? Or would they leave them to fend for themselves? He didn't know. But he knew that the Veldorans could not remain passive. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable. The universe had cried out, and the Deathworlders had answered. But would they always be there to answer again? "We must be ready," Talaran said firmly. "The Deathworlders showed us that there is power beyond our understanding. We must learn what we can from them, use their technology, and prepare for whatever comes next." The leaders nodded in agreement, though doubt still lingered in their eyes. It was difficult to imagine themselves embracing the kind of power that the Deathworlders had brought to their world. But they knew, deep down, that survival required more than just rebuilding. It required change, strength, and a willingness to adapt. As the group parted ways, Talaran stood alone in the center of the ruined city. The winds whispered around him, carrying the sounds of distant activity. His people were beginning to rebuild, but the world was different now. They were not the same Veldorans who had once lived in peace. They had seen what the universe could throw at them, and they had survived. But the question remained, how long would that survival last without the Deathworlders by their side? The Elder gazed into the distance, watching the remaining Deathworlder ships depart from the planet's atmosphere. The Veldorans were left with the knowledge that they were not alone in the galaxy, that there were forces out there, capable of great destruction, but also willing to protect those who proved worthy. The seeds of change had been planted. The galaxy had changed Veldora, and now the Veldorans would have to change themselves. Only time would tell what kind of future they would build, and whether the Deathworlders would return when they were needed once again. The Deathworlder legacy. The days following the battle had been filled with silence. Veldora was a planet in mourning, a world that had seen everything it held dear reduced to rubble. The destruction was still fresh, the scars of war too raw for many to comprehend. But amid this chaos, the most pressing question remained: what would they do with the power that had saved them? How could they carry forward the legacy of the Deathworlders and ensure their survival in a galaxy that seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing day? Talaran had gathered the leaders once more. This time, they weren't in the city's heart, but in a hidden chamber beneath the mountains. Here, away from prying eyes, the council could discuss matters of grave importance. The room was dimly lit, shadows casting over the faces of the elders as they took their seats. Each one looked weary, their minds burdened by the weight of their new reality. Talaran spoke first, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We stand on the precipice of a new era. The Deathworlders have shown us what true power looks like. They wield technology, tactics, and strength that we could never have imagined. But it is not just about what they gave us. It's about what we must do with it." The leaders exchanged uneasy glances. The thought of using the Deathworlders' technology was both exhilarating and terrifying. These were tools designed for war, for destruction. They weren't just meant to protect. They could annihilate. Would they, the peaceful Veldorans, truly be able to harness such power without losing themselves in the process? Sarah, one of the more vocal leaders, spoke up. "But we are not warriors. We've spent our lives in peace, cultivating our land, and living in harmony with nature. How can we possibly take on the mantle of the Deathworlders?" Talaran's gaze softened. He understood her hesitation. The Veldorans had never sought out conflict. They had only been defenders of their peaceful existence. But things had changed. "We are not warriors, Sarah. But we must become something more than we were. The universe is not kind, and the Deathworlders have shown us that those who do not adapt will be left behind. Our people will need to defend themselves, not only from threats we know, but from those we cannot yet fathom." Sarah's eyes filled with doubt. "And what if we fail? What if the power we wield ends up corrupting us?" Talaran had no easy answer for her. The thought had crossed his mind countless times since the Deathworlders' departure. Could the Veldorans truly control the power they now possessed? Or would it turn on them, as it had done for so many civilizations in the past? "Then we will fail," Talaran said quietly. But it will be a failure of choice, not fate. We will choose to learn, to grow, and to protect our world. We will not be passive. We will not wait for our enemies to come to us. There was a long silence as the leaders considered his words. Finally, it was Errol, the youngest among them, who broke the silence. What if the Deathworlders could help us again? What if they could teach us how to use this power responsibly? Talaran looked at Errol, his expression thoughtful. That is the question that haunts me. They left us with their knowledge, but they are gone. Will they return when we call upon them again? Or will they see us as no more than another world they have left behind? There was a long pause. The truth was, none of them knew. The Deathworlders were a mystery, their motives as enigmatic as their technology. They had helped the Veldorans, but there was no guarantee they would come back to aid them a second time. Perhaps the Veldorans were on their own now, and if that was the case, they would need to learn to defend themselves, on their own terms. We cannot rely on them, Talaran finally said, his voice firm. But we can learn from them. We will use the power they've left behind, and we will ensure that our world remains safe. Our children must know how to defend themselves, how to stand tall in the face of any enemy. But we will teach them to do so with honor, with respect, and with the same wisdom that the Deathworlders showed us. The room fell silent once again, but this time, it was not a silence filled with doubt. It was a silence of resolve. The leaders knew that the path they were about to take would not be easy. There would be challenges, and there would be moments when they would question their decisions. But the reality was clear. They had no choice but to move forward. The legacy of the Deathworlders was one of power, but also one of responsibility. The Veldorans would carry that legacy, and they would make sure that it did not consume them. They would take the lessons they had learned and forge a future that was stronger, smarter, and more prepared for whatever the galaxy could throw at them. As the meeting came to a close, Talaran walked out into the bright sunlight of Veldora's recovered world. The skies were still clear, and the sun shone down on the land, now scared by war but healing. The seeds of change were planted. The Veldorans had chosen to take control of their future, and no matter what came next, they would be ready. The Deathworlders had answered the call once. Whether they would answer again remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: the Veldorans would not be left vulnerable. They had learned from the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They had seen the power of the Deathworlders, and now they would ensure that they were never caught unprepared again. The price of power. The Veldorans stood at the crossroads of their history. Their newfound power, a gift from the Deathworlders, was not just a tool for defense. It was a force capable of shaping the future of their world. But with such immense power came a burden, a challenge that no one had truly anticipated. While the leaders debated and the population cautiously explored the limits of the technology left behind, something darker began to stir. The more the Veldorans learned about the Deathworlders' tech, the more they realized just how much they had yet to understand. Talaran had not expected the unease that would follow. After the initial triumph of survival, questions had started to surface. Was it possible to harness such overwhelming power without succumbing to its dangers? The Deathworlders had been a warrior race, known for their brutal strength and unfathomable determination. But the Veldorans were not like them. Their entire society was based on peace, on maintaining balance with the world around them. Could they truly embrace a weaponized future without it consuming everything they had worked for? Talaran's thoughts were interrupted by a call from Sarah, who had been overseeing the first phase of weapon development. She stood in the doorway of his chambers, her face pale, her eyes wide with concern. "Talaran, we need to talk." He immediately rose, his own unease rising. "What happened?" "It's the tech," she said, her voice tight. "We've made progress, but there are side effects we didn't predict. The energy from the devices. It's not just draining our resources, it's affecting us, our minds. We're starting to feel its influence, its hunger." Talaran's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected something was wrong, But hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. "Explain," he urged, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "The more we use it, the more we feel its pull. It's like the technology is feeding on us. There's a sense of urgency, like we have to use it, like it controls us rather than the other way around. The engineers are becoming obsessed with it. I can see it in their eyes. They're no longer the people they were." Talaran's mind raced. This was exactly what he had feared. The Deathworlders' technology was designed to be wielded by beings of immense physical and mental strength, not by a peaceful people like the Veldorans. The very nature of this power threatened to warp their society into something darker, something they couldn't control. "We need to stop," he said, his voice low and firm. "We can't let this consume us. We have to learn to control it, or we'll lose everything." Sarah nodded, but her expression was filled with doubt. "And if we can't? What then? If this power is too much for us, what are we supposed to do? Go back to being defenseless? Let the galaxy chew us up again?" Talaran's gaze hardened. "No, we don't go back. We find a way to fight without losing ourselves. There must be another way." The next days were filled with frantic attempts to understand the depths of the problem. Talaran called in the brightest minds of the Veldoran people, but the results were always the same. The power was too overwhelming. The more they tapped into the Deathworlders' technology, the more it seemed to rewrite the very fabric of their society. It was as though the power they had gained was a living entity, with its own desires, its own will. Talaran could see that Sarah was right. The engineers and scientists who had once been calm and collected were now driven, obsessed. They no longer cared about the balance they had once cherished. They worked tirelessly, day and night, convinced that the only way to survive was to master this power at any cost. But there was something even more alarming, a quiet voice in the back of Talaran's mind that whispered doubts. Was this really just the technology at play? Or was it something else? Was the power not only corrupting their bodies but also their very souls? He couldn't shake the feeling that the Deathworlders had known this would happen. Perhaps they had left the technology behind as a test, knowing that the Veldorans, peaceful and gentle as they were, would not be able to wield it without great cost. Maybe the true lesson of the Deathworlders was not in the technology itself, but in the challenge of resisting its temptations, of holding on to their humanity in the face of such overwhelming power. Talaran stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The night was calm, but in the distance, the glow of energy pulses could be seen, faint but growing. The people were trying to control the power they had discovered, but it was clear to him now. This was not just about defense. It was about something far more dangerous. Sarah joined him on the balcony, her face drawn with worry. "What do we do, Talaran? We can't keep going like this. We'll lose ourselves." "I don't know," Talaran admitted. "But we can't give up either. We can't allow the galaxy to see us as weak. We will find another way. We have to. For our people, for our future." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. In his heart, Talaran knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The Veldorans were teetering on the edge of a precipice, and he wasn't sure if they would fall or soar. But one thing was certain: whatever choice they made, they could not go back. The power had changed them, and now they had to decide whether it would be their salvation or their doom. The ultimate decision. Talaran sat in his chambers, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Outside, the Veldoran city hummed with activity, but inside his heart, there was only silence. A deep, suffocating void. The decisions made in the last few days had set them on a path from which there was no turning back. The power of the Deathworlders had changed them in ways no one had predicted. The obsession, the corruption, and the violent thirst for control. It had all grown too strong to ignore. He stared at the holographic projection in front of him. It showed the Deathworlder technology, the energy sources, the weapons, the tools of war. It was beautiful in its design, efficient, deadly. But it was also something else. It was a poison, slowly seeping into the heart of their society. Sarah's voice interrupted his thoughts. Talaran, we've lost too much. The council is divided. Some say we should dismantle the tech. Others want to use it fully, to crush any enemy that might threaten us. Talaran didn't look at her. And what do you think? His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of all his doubts. Sarah paused before answering. I don't know anymore. I've seen what it does to us, to our people. We were a peaceful race, Talaran. Now, we're something else. We've let the power change us, and I'm afraid that once we cross this line, there's no coming back. The truth of her words hit Talaran like a physical blow. He had feared this moment, this final, terrible realization. They had taken the power because they had thought it was the only way to survive. But now, he wasn't sure if survival was worth the cost. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The streets were alive with activity, but there was a tension in the air, a sense of waiting, of anticipation. The Veldorans had become a people on the edge of something. Would they fall into the abyss, or could they rise above the darkness that had begun to consume them? We need to make a choice, Talaran said finally, his voice firm. We can't keep dancing around this, pretending we have time. We either embrace the power, use it to become something stronger, something no one can ever threaten again, or we let it go. We give it up, and we rebuild. But we can't keep it hanging over us. Sarah walked to his side, her expression grave. And what will that mean? If we choose to give up the power, will we still be able to protect ourselves? Will we still be able to defend the Veldorans from the galaxy? We'll be weaker, vulnerable. Talaran nodded. He knew the stakes. If they let go of the Deathworlders' technology, they would be forced to go back to their old ways. Peaceful, yes, but defenseless. The galaxy would see them as weak once again, easy prey for those who would take advantage of their kindness. I know the risks, Talaran replied. But at what cost, Sarah? What happens to us if we lose ourselves in this power? What happens to everything we stand for? Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment, they both understood the weight of the decision. They had been given a gift, a weapon that could destroy entire worlds, but in return, it had taken something far more precious. It had taken their innocence, their peace, their very souls. Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted the silence. A group of engineers rushed into the room, their faces pale and filled with fear. Talaran, it's happening, one of them gasped. The tech, it's getting out of control. We've lost the ability to control it. It's spreading beyond our reach. The power is taking over. Talaran's heart sank. It had all led to this moment. They had known the risks, but they had underestimated the danger. The technology, once a tool, had now become a force that could no longer be contained. What do we do? Sarah whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Talaran closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. The choice was no longer just about the survival of the Veldorans. It was about their very identity, their future. He knew what he had to do. We shut it down, he said, his voice unwavering. We shut it down before it destroys us all. But as the engineers scrambled to find a way to cut off the power, Talaran knew that this would be no easy task. The tech had already begun to root itself deep into the fabric of their society. Shutting it down would mean sacrificing everything they had built, their power, their future, the protection it had given them. The room was filled with a tense silence as the engineers worked desperately. Talaran and Sarah stood side by side, watching as the final battle for their future played out before them. This was the price they would pay for dabbling with forces they didn't fully understand. They had gained the power to defend themselves, but at what cost? Would they lose everything they had fought for, or would they find a way to save themselves from the very thing they had thought would save them? Time seemed to stretch on as they waited for a solution, the silence broken only by the hum of the technology that had once seemed like their salvation. Talaran felt a deep sense of loss, not just for their people, but for the world they had once known. They had wanted to be strong, But now they had to decide if strength meant holding on to power or finding a way to give it up without losing who they truly were. As the final seconds ticked by, Talaran made a vow to himself. No matter the outcome, no matter the cost, he would make sure that the Veldorans did not lose their soul. Even if the galaxy turned its back on them, even if they had to stand alone, they would not become what they feared. And so, with a single command, the final act of defiance began.